Peter, where you go, my heart follows too. I'll always be moved by you, your heart and art and poetry, your love of life and liberty.
So, how did you know Peter McWilliams?
I knew him because I knew him as the first major victim of the medical marijuana wars in California. I'll be honest, I'm pretty sure I had met him at a couple of affairs, but his friend Todd McCormick was how I know about him. What I remember is, of course, that Todd got arrested, and that was, I think, before that, unfortunately, Peter had died by then. And I sure don't need to rehash the basis of the arrest to you folks, but obviously if Peter would have been allowed to use medical marijuana, the assumption is he would still be alive today. So I think he was probably the first full victim, somebody whose life was lost to the bias and prejudice. And I think, by the way, it was partly the bias against medical marijuana and partly the bias against gays. I imagine he had HIV and AIDS, and I'm sure that probably was something people were having trouble dealing with. I don't know that.
How did you feel when you heard that he died?
Well, it's always sad when you have some creative spirit that dies for whatever reason, but it was particularly sad for Peter because he seemed to be in his prime. He was writing great books, and it wasn't by his own choice. I mean, I've had creative friends who have died, but it's usually because they've committed suicide. They've decided it's time to go, and I can respect that. That wasn't the case with Peter. It wasn't a fair thing. So I think we lost a very bright, creative person far earlier than we should have.
What do you think about Peter's influence on activism today?
Well, I think what has happened is Peter's case highlighted the importance of the medical marijuana issue in the state of California, and so that growth since then has been miraculous. You know, I mean, my goodness, you have a whole industry now in California that didn't exist back when Peter was foreshadowing what the industry might look like. He and Todd, they were growing high-quality marijuana on a scale that generally wasn't available yet in California. You know, if he could imagine how good things are today, even though I know they're not perfect. I mean, I fully understand the feds have been running like crazy through California, and some degree Colorado. But basically, most parts of California, you can buy marijuana if it doesn't take very long to get to a dispensary to buy marijuana. That's not a bad place to be.
So what do you think he would feel, how do you think he would feel about the movement as a whole today?
Well, I think Peter was almost entirely medical use, and the movement today, while medical use still, there are many states where they're still wrestling with medical use, and they will be for a few years. But I think without question, all states will eventually have a version. But the issue now is actually changing, I think, to full legalization for all responsible use, regardless of why you smoke. And so I don't know, Peter would probably, I'm sure he would be supportive, but again, I think his major interest was medical use.
Yes. What's the most important message?
The most important message, I think, without question, of the tragedy involving Peter McWilliams is that marijuana is a serious medical agent. There's no doubt about that. There hasn't been for 5,000 years. It was actively prescribed in this country from the 1850s until the 1940s. Early 40s, they took it off the apothecary or the U.S. formulary. So, I mean, until Peter's death, it got a lot of attention because he lived in a celebrity town. He was somewhat of a celebrity himself. I think there was still a lot of doubt whether marijuana was really a medicine or whether that was just an excuse to get high. I think with Peter, they figured out that no, it was serious business. I'm sorry it cost him his life. But
what do you think of the quote, nausea is an unsolved problem in medicine and marijuana is the finest anti-nausea medication known to science?
Well, that sounds like a fair quote.
Peter said that.
I sort of assume he did. And the truth is that they've learned, of course, that for lots of diseases dealing with the symptoms, it's dealing with nausea, HIV positive a lot, cancer treatments a lot. Now, what's interesting is it's gone beyond that. Initially, they were only dealing with the symptoms, and then they began to find in more sophisticated research that marijuana, for some diseases, is neuroregenerative. For example, it tends to grow new nerve endings for MS patients and Crohn's patients and stuff. So it's not just symptoms. It has potential curative powers in some areas. We have a lot more we need to learn, but Peter knew that.
If Peter were here right now, what would you say to him?
Well, I'd say you've made enormous progress. You know, we have 17 states in the District of Columbia that now allow the medical use of marijuana under some circumstances. They're not as generous as California. None of them would exist probably, but for California, and Peter had a lot to do with that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'll give you a hug.
I hope to win.